and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the made-for-TV 1976 psychological drama, Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby, as directed by Sam O'Steen and as based on the characters depicted in Ira Levin's 1967 novel, Rosemary's Baby, and the 1968 movie by Roman Polanski of the same name. This movie, indeed, being a sequel to that aforementioned movie, itself being a horror classic and very much a cult phenomenon. So, Rosemary's Baby is indeed one of my own personal favourites from the era that it resides in, being a very defining horror, not duly because of any gore or outright scares, but mainly because of its focus on Rosemary herself. Its build-up of suspense and intrigue into the mystery that unfolds and the deep kind of imprint that it leaves on the mind. I hadn't, however, ever even known or even ever realised that there was ever a sequel produced, albeit one made directly for TV, which straight off the bat, it kind of does seem like a little bit of a slap in the face, you know, to Polanski's work. For me, it was indeed a bit of a curiosity, given my love for the original, and I was certainly intrigued, TV quality or not, to see where the story might have ended up. And with kind of a clickbait title like, Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby, not just what's happened or just what's become, but look, it certainly sounded like there might have been something juicy in store for the demonised little tyke. The film was actually directed by Sam O'Sheen, who had worked as the editor for the original movie and actually kind of centred around a number of the original characters, albeit played by different actors and actresses, for the most part bar Ruth Gordon, who actually returns to play Minnie Castavette, who had been a big part of the group who subjected Rosemary to the horrific events that transpired in the first movie. So indeed, there was an element of continuation at least. It is an original works in its own right, being only kind of based on Ira Levin's original novel, pretty much by name and characters only in this respect, and indeed not based at all nor connected in any way to his later follow-up novel, Son of Rosemary, which followed some 20 years later than this film, being published in 1997. The film follows from the events of the first movie, where Rosemary Woodhouse, as originally played by Mia Farrow, was coerced and subdued by a group of people who, worshipped Satan, and was ultimately raped by the beast in order to bear his child. After much of the horror kind of unfolds, Rosemary does, in the end, choose to raise her baby with the coven, speaking to her courage, conviction, and determination as a mother. Split into 3 chapters, each following sort of an anthology kind of mechanism around an overarching plot, shall we say. The Book of Rosemary, the Book of Adrian, and the Book of Andrew. The movie kind of deals with a different aspect of the fight and internal struggle between good and evil happening within Andrew, or indeed Adrian, as he is known to the coven. The Book of Rosemary sees a now fraught and tiresome Rosemary, as now played by Patty Duke, who originally, I believe, auditioned for the role of Rosemary back for the original Rosemary's Baby. But this is now set some years after the events of the first movie. She now plans to take her 8-year-old son, Andrew, as played at this point by Philip Boyer, from those who would wish to use his powers for evil and bring on a new era begetting the end of days and Satan's return. Pursued by the Covenant, Rosemary fights with everything she has left, but finds it isn't enough to keep the fanatics from finding her and taking Adrian back for themselves. We then catch up with Adrian as an adult, as now played by Stephen McHattie, as after being raised by a member of the Coven in a remote part of the United States, somewhere in the middle of the desert. They just leave him there. After all that they went through, he's just dumped in the middle of the desert. I suppose they knew where he was. But as part of the story in the book of Adrian, this occurs, where preparations are being made, now that Adrian has kind of come of age, to set up a ritual to use Adrian's body as a vessel for Satan's return. Finally, following the ritual, we further follow Andrew in indeed the book of Andrew, where he awakes in a mental institution with little memory of the events that transpired that devastating night. After escaping, Andrew soon finds that he is still being pursued by the coven, and with the aid of one of the nurses, Ellen, as played by Donna Mills, goes on his own mission to seek out answers for himself with regards to his true nature and purpose in life. Yeah, certainly an interesting piece of cinema, or rather TV, especially when you consider its roots and connection to a genuine psychological horror classic. This contains none of the finesse or elegance, or indeed savoured suspense or intrigue of its predecessor, but yet still tries to continue the story in its own way, and indeed poses a kind of couple of twists, I would suppose, and turns of its own. It delves deeper into the occult, not in a particularly meaningful way, mind you, and this time around they do seem to have more powers, especially when it comes to driving vehicles and changing the weather. But we do get to see more of their practices and customs, albeit if quite wishy-washy. The thing is, it wasn't the worst thing that it could have been, but it's certainly not a particularly good movie by a long shot, and as a sequel to Rosemary's Baby, it never really stood a chance, and all in all, it's pretty abysmal in this respect. It utilises a kind of weird and very often off-putting narrative between characters, often between Roman Castevet, as played by Ray Milland in this instance, and Guy Woodhouse, as played by George Maharis, who, you know, of the two original characters of the first movie, Roman being one of the coven's leaders, and Guy being Rosemary's husband, who sold her body to the coven for a bit of the old fame and fortune in Hollywood in the original movie. These now kind of both tell the story and kind of set up further details off screen that seem kind of haphazard and out of nowhere in a very kind of lazy way to progress the story. And for us, you know, as the audience, without really having to engage or do any of the legwork to further explain characters' decisions in some kind of formalised bedtime story. Considering the movie's edge and pretense, and indeed how we left Rosemary at the end of the original, one would have kind of expected the son of Satan to have been a beast themselves, you know? The look of shock and horror on Rosemary's face certainly kind of led us down that path. Cloven hooves and all, you know? Evil incarnate and with powers like no other. But indeed, Adrian, or Andrew, whichever, just ended up being a normal 8-year-old boy. So it certainly was quite unimaginative in that department. They, of course, went down the Omen route, being a film released in the same year and with a very, very similar premise. But actually, fair dues to them, this is simply not a rehash of that movie, nor indeed the original Rosemary's Baby. They do steer very clear of triggering the same kind of events and darkness we see in that aforementioned movie. But in doing so, they kind of most definitely lost their way, kind of giving us a very incoherent mess of a movie that really didn't know what to do with the ideas it had, nor its lead characters. This, along with some of the shoddiest camera work and cheap theatrics I've seen in a long while, made this a very dry and a crusty watch for sure. It never really has any direction, it never really picks up speed, and much is just simply made of elements for coincidence. One minute, Adrian is the son of Satan, next we have to kill him, then we don't, then we need some, or maybe all, if not, of his body parts, perhaps his organs, no, hang on, wait a minute, perhaps we could just start again. One minute he's strong, with his father's will, next he's too weak to inherit his powers. It is simply all over the place in this respect, changing from one theme to another to kind of suit when one gets played out simply to kind of drag it out that little bit further, but still having practically defined, or no practically defined, end goal. In the end, Adrian gets up to what every Prince of Darkness gets up to, I suppose. Drugs, reckless driving, gambling, drinking, rock and roll. Or is it just that kind of thing that most people get up to on a Saturday night? Put it this way, he's certainly not going to give the Omen's Damien a run for his money anytime soon. Adrian is a poor excuse for the demonic chosen one, and a bit of a spoilt flop and moody upstart if you ask me. Okay, so fair's fair, he does rough up a few bullies and tackle a few big hairy bikers, and generally just kind of being a broody rebellious teen, but nothing to kind of suggest the terror he could and was supposed to inflict, and certainly nothing for us to kind of get excited about. Apparently, the fate of the world is at stake. However, it never really gets emotive enough for us to really care. You know, just come see, come sa. To tell you the truth, I don't know if they ever really did know what they wanted to do with Rosemary's Baby. And in this, the title itself is just pure clickbait. There's nothing much to look at here when all's said and done. There is nothing really going on. Overall, this is a movie that essentially serves no real purpose, has no purpose, and certainly no real aim towards its own end game. There's little in the way of suspense, and it certainly gets quite wacky at times, especially when it's trying to go down the more kind of symbolic route of its predecessor, which it never really gets quite right, nor manages to really capture the same level of fear or tension the original movie had in bounds. As a sequel to the original Rosemary's Baby, it is pretty dire and pretty boring when all's said and done. Relatively speaking, it doesn't really go anywhere at all, and its main protagonist, antagonist, depending on your viewpoint, never really kind of lives up to any of the terrifying promise one might expect from the son of Satan. Now, I can't knock it completely. It wasn't all that bad for an early TV movie. No, it's still a terrible sequel, don't get me wrong. But it does try its hand at a few kind of twists and turns, even if some may be misplaced or somewhat convoluted. And it does steer itself clear of just being another rehash of the same old same. It's just, in the end, there's just not all that much going on with Rosemary's Baby that's actually worth looking at, you know? Worth a watch as an interesting curiosity piece, perhaps, but nothing more. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, show reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.